I heard something about Caesar from Fallout New Vegas. He's like a big deal in that game, right?
Absolutely. Caesar, who's actually born Edward Sallow, is super interesting. He's like this intellectual leader who founded Caesar's Legion. It's this like highly militaristic society modeled after, well, ancient Rome.
Oh, I didn't know his real name was Edward. That's wild. How'd he go from Edward to Caesar, though?
Well, that's part of what makes him like so fascinating. He used to be a follower of the Apocalypse, which, you know, they're like these peace-loving scholars. And then through a series of events, complex ones, mind you, he decides the best way to bring order to the chaos of the post-apocalyptic world is to basically recreate Rome, you know?
That sounds intense. And I guess that makes him like both smart and ruthless?
Totally. I mean, he's all about imposing like this autocratic structure. And if that means being brutally authoritarian, he goes for it. But, you know, he genuinely believes it's the way to restore civilization. So there's this complexity to his character. He's intellectual, but yeah, also super authoritarian.
Wow. I never would have guessed he was that layered. Makes me want to like dive deeper into his storyline now.
You totally should. He's one of those characters that you know, love to hate or hate to love. Either way, he's memorable. Caesar's philosophy is deeply rooted in his interpretation of history, human nature, and his disdain for the failures of the old world, which he blames on its reliance on democracy, capitalism, and individualism. His ideology blends a pragmatic understanding of power dynamics with an almost fanatical devotion to creating what he sees as an enduring and unifying order. Here are some complementary insights into his philosophy. Key tenets of Caesar's ideology. The cycle of civilization and chaos. Caesar believes history follows a cyclical pattern, where civilizations rise, grow decadent, collapse, and are replaced. He sees himself as the force to break this cycle by establishing a society immune to internal decay through discipline and a singular vision. He views the NCR as an example of a decaying democracy destined to collapse under its inefficiencies and corruption. His legion is positioned as its antithesis, a ruthless hierarchical system designed for long-term stability. The will to power, he subscribes to a philosophy of might making right, where strength, discipline, and authority are the only meaningful tools to impose order on chaos. This belief is influenced by his readings of Roman and pre-war texts, particularly Nietzschean ideas of the Übermensch, overman, and the rejection of conventional morality in favor of creating one's own values. Unity through subjugation. Caesar sees individuality and tribalism as obstacles to unity. By conquering tribes and assimilating them into the legion, he eradicates their previous identities and forges a single, cohesive society under his control. To him, this is not cruelty, but a necessary step toward ensuring peace and order in a world torn apart by fragmented factions. Rejecting the old world, Caesar despises the remnants of pre-war culture, viewing them as relics of a failed civilization. Concepts like democracy, capitalism, and technological reliance are antithetical to his vision of a simpler, more controlled society. He criticizes the NCR for trying to resurrect the old world, which he believes is inherently flawed and unsalvageable. The role of fear and violence. Caesar views fear and violence as essential tools for maintaining order. Public executions, crucifixions, and brutal punishments are not just acts of cruelty, but calculated methods of ensuring obedience and deterring rebellion. He often justifies these acts as sacrifices for the greater good, believing that short-term suffering leads to long-term stability. Fate and the divine mission, Caesar frames himself as a figure of destiny, chosen to bring about a new era of humanity. This belief in his divine mission gives him a sense of purpose and allows him to rationalize his actions, no matter how extreme. His references to historical and mythological figures, such as Julius Caesar and Augustus, reinforce his self-image as a transformative leader destined to change the world. Philosophical contradictions. While Caesar's philosophy is coherent and intellectually grounded, it is not without contradictions. Reliance on the old world. Despite his disdain for pre-war culture, he draws heavily on its history, language, and philosophy to justify his actions and construct his identity. Fragility of the Legion. His authoritarian system is highly centralized and dependent on his leadership. Critics argue that the Legion would likely collapse without him, undermining his vision of an enduring society. Moral relativism. Caesar claims moral superiority over the NCR, yet his methods, slavery, oppression, and mass murder, are as brutal and corrupt as those he condemns. Interaction with the player. When speaking to the player, Caesar often elaborates on these ideas, challenging their worldview and pushing them to consider his perspective. He invites the player to see the Legion as a necessary evil, a force of order in a world where chaos has reigned for too long. Caesar's philosophy is not just a justification for his actions, but also a critique of the player's choices. Depending on how players interact with him, they might find themselves questioning the NCR's flaws or grappling with the morality of supporting such a ruthless regime.